Imagine growing up for 40 years. That's an entire lifetime. 40 years where everyone loves you. You're accepted by everyone. They literally put you as number one before everyone else in the entire community. Imagine that's the case. But then imagine just after 40 years, because Allah gives you revelation and you turn to Allah, things go the opposite way round. From that moment, everything started going downhill. Persecution, torture, insults. He had to see his companions be tortured and even killed in front of his eyes. They were boycotted to the point where the companions were eating leaves from a tree because they didn't have any food or resources. Things were just getting worse and worse and worse for 13 years, after 40 years of having an actual very, very good life. And so after all this persecution, we reached the time of the Prophet ﷺ's life where he describes it as the year of depression, the year of sorrow. And in that year, what happened was, after all of this boycott, all of this persecution, he lost his uncle Abu Talib. Now, a bit about the Arabs. Back in the day, you had to have protection to be living in the country that you were in. It's kind of like a passport. So someone would say, I protect such and such person. This is essentially your passport to survive and not be killed or exiled or tortured, etc. So the Prophet ﷺ lost Abu Talib. He lost his passport. So many people wanted to kill him, but they couldn't because of Abu Talib. And now Abu Talib passed away. Can you imagine? The passport was taken away just like that. And not only that, but he was also the father figure of the Prophet ﷺ. It's like he lost his dad, you see? Very, very painful incident for the Prophet ﷺ. And not long after, who else did he lose? The Prophet ﷺ? Khadija radiallahu anha, which is his wife, the only person who believed in him when everyone rejected him. So it was a very heavy experience for the Prophet ﷺ. So imagine 10 or so years, 11 years or so of constant persecution and torture, and then you lose your passport to be protected, and then you lose your wife on top of that. Just things get worse and worse and worse, subhanAllah. And so in that moment, the Prophet ﷺ, he carried on with his heart tied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he decided to come to Ta'if. There's no way for him to stay in Mecca. If he stayed, khalas, they would just kill him and get rid of Islam, essentially. And so in that moment, he decided to walk all the way to Ta'if. That drive that we did, okay, it probably took about 2 days of walking. And so he walked all the way to Ta'if, which is on top of a mountain. Imagine 2 days of walking on top of a mountain. And this is where he approached the people, the elites, the leaders of Ta'if, to find a new beginning. So he goes to 3 leaders and he speaks to them and he invites them to Islam. What would you expect to happen if you're the Prophet ﷺ? You have this optimism, you have this good vibe, khalas, inshallah, new beginnings, this is where I'm going to start a new da'wah, new life, etc. Those 3 leaders didn't just reject the Prophet ﷺ, they rejected him in the most disgusting of ways. Imagine one of the comments was, has Allah not found someone better than you to become a prophet? So they didn't just reject him, they gave him the worst of insults, and this really hurt the Prophet ﷺ. So he walked away from them and he stayed in Ta'if for a few extra days, for about a week or so. And in that week, he would call the people to Islam and he would constantly give da'wah, subhanAllah. He didn't give up the mission. He never stopped and gave up and said, Ya Allah, why are you doing this to me? And when he saw the leaders, they saw that maybe some people were being affected by Islam and they were accepting. This is where the Prophet ﷺ was stoned, essentially. The leaders gathered all the rough people of society. Imagine the Prophet ﷺ is here calling people to Islam, just being very peaceful. All the rough people of society, the gangs, lowly of society, and they all gathered in front of everyone, the entire community, and they started pelting the Prophet ﷺ with stones, to the point where he was bleeding top to bottom. His sandals were dripping with blood, subhanAllah. And so what he did then was he started stumbling out of Ta'if. And subhanAllah, he describes in the hadith that when he got to a place about 7 kilometers outside of Ta'if where he was stoned, that's where he regained his consciousness. What does that tell you? This situation was so difficult on the Prophet ﷺ that it took 7 kilometers of walking before he realized where he was. He was that delirious. 7 kilometers is a very long while. How many hours of walking is that? A few hours of walking where he's just lost touch with reality. He doesn't know what's going on. He's shocked. He's upset. And this is where he came to. You are standing where the Prophet ﷺ came to. And he leaned against one of the walls. And then he lifted his hands to the sky and he made a very, very long, beautiful dua. Now, I can't say this dua to you because it's very, very long. So I'll summarize it. In essence, after all of this rejection, all of this torture, all of this pain and hardship, what did the Prophet ﷺ say? He said, Ya Allah, if you are happy with me, then I'm happy with what you've given to me. But a little bit of ease would be better. Look at the etiquettes with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He never said, Ya Allah, why are you doing this to me? I was the most beloved person to everyone for 40 years. And then now I'm the most hated. I've been exiled out of my own country. You caused my dad figure to die, my protection to die. You caused my wife to die, and now I'm being rejected by another society. He never said that. He turns to Allah, he says, Ya Allah, if you're happy with me, then that is fine. But please, something easier would be better. This is the general gist of the dua. So when he was in the lowest of the low, he still turned to Allah, and from that dua, things got better straight away. There's a man named Addas, and this is the mosque of Addas down here. We can check out, inshallah, after we finish this talk. Addas is an Iraqi servant, okay? So he worked for his master in this area. And so he saw the Prophet ﷺ stumbling, and he was covered in blood. And so the master sent Addas with some grapes. What did we say he was? Iraqi? Christian. So he goes to the Prophet ﷺ, he says, here's some grapes, okay? So the Prophet ﷺ takes a grape, and he says, Bismillah, before eating it. So Addas is shocked. He said, wait, what? The Arabs don't say this. Where did you get this from? And he said, oh, Allah has taught me this. And so I asked Addas, where are you from? And Addas, he says, I'm from Nineveh, which is a place near Iraq. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he says, oh, the place where Yunus alayhi salam was. And Addas was shocked. He said, no one in Arabia knows who Yunus is. How do you know who Yunus is? And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, how can I not know who Yunus is when he is my brother and we are both prophets? And there and then Addas converted to Islam. And subhanAllah, the scholars commented at this and they said that this is a significant situation. Why? Because Addas is from the other corner of the earth. It's almost like Allah is saying, okay, your people have rejected you, but the people from the furthest part of the world, they're going to accept you one day. And look at us 1400 years later saying that we are Muslim from every corner of the earth, subhanAllah. When that happened, the Prophet ﷺ looked up and there was a big cloud that came and sheltered him. And so he looked up and he saw Jibreel in the cloud. And Jibreel said to him, Ya Rasulullah, Allah has sent me because he's heard what the people have done to you. And then he said, here is the angel of the mountains. If you want right now, command me and I will slam these two mountains in on Ta'if and obliterate it, destroy it. And do you know what the Prophet ﷺ said? He said, no, perhaps they might come to Islam later. Look at the rahmah of the Prophet ﷺ. He's just been humiliated in the worst of ways possible. Imagine someone did a fraction of that to you. Yet he said no. Perhaps they turn to Islam, perhaps they become Muslim. And they did later on in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. You see? And then after that, this is two eases now. After that, there's a third ease. The Prophet ﷺ starts making his way back to Mecca. When he does that, he starts praying tahajjud. And as he's reciting, Allah tells us in the Quran that a group of jinn walked past him and they heard the Quran being recited. And the jinn, they stopped and they said, listen, what is this? And so they listened to the Prophet ﷺ recite for 2-3 hours in tahajjud. And they said, this is definitely from Allah. And so these jinn, as Allah says in the verse in the Quran, they went back to their jinn friends and they started giving dawah to their jinn friends. Again, symbolic meaning that, okay, the human beings have rejected you, but the world of the jinn have not rejected you, and soon everyone is going to accept you. Subhanallah. You see? So this is generally what happened in the story of Ta'if. So how can we take benefit from this ourselves? I think the greatest benefit we can take is to realize that life is not supposed to be easy. Jannah is not supposed to be easy to get. Look at how the Prophet ﷺ went through every single hardship you can think of. If anyone had the right to say, Ya Allah, why me? What are you doing this to me for? It would be the Prophet ﷺ. Yet in that moment where he was in the lowest, he spoke to Allah gently. Ya Allah, if you're happy with me, that's all that matters. Because ultimately that's all that matters in life. And so just like the Prophet ﷺ went through the hardest times, wallahi, you're going to go through the hardest times. And that's why Allah says in the Quran, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا حَتَّى يَقُولَ الرَّسُولُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, do you really think that you're going to get into Jannah without being tested the same way the prophets were tested? The prophets themselves were shaken so violently that they looked at Allah and they said, when is your help coming, Ya Allah? And then Allah says, indeed, the help of Allah is near. And just like it was near for the Prophet ﷺ, it will be near for us when we will be violently shaken too. So realize, O Muslim, that when you guys go through difficult times, health, finances, relationships, whatever have you, we're going to be tested. When you go through those times, remember to maintain a good etiquette with Allah and to stick to Him through everything that you go through. Never ever blame Allah. Never turn away from Him through these hard times. Because it's in these times where the faraj is going to come, the ease is going to come. You have to realize this is very important. Look at Ayyub alayhi salam. 17 years he was bedbound. 17 years he lost all his children. 17 years he was tested in the worst ways possible. What does Allah say in the Quran? He captures this quote, what he says. وَأَيُّوبَ إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ أَنِّي مَسَّنِيَ الضُّرُّ وَأَنْتَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. Ya Allah, I have been touched with hardship. He didn't say you have touched me with hardship. You have made my life difficult. He said, Ya Allah, I have been touched with hardship and you are the most merciful. 17 years of being bedbound. And he lost his children, he lost everything. And he said, Ya Allah, I have been touched with hardship and you are the most merciful. And what does Allah say in the next verse? فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ. Allah answered his call and he gave him his children back and he gave him his health back and the faraj came, the ease came. So when you're in your lowest, turn to Allah, not away from Him. Very important lesson here. And this is all what we can learn from being in a place like this. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. Inshallah, let's go look at the masjid. Jazakumullah khairan.